Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalryan, and there's a lot of videos going around telling everybody how classes feel. A lot of videos try to bring as much positivity as possible, explain to you why you might want to level a brand new class that you never played before, or why you might want to pick up a new main. Well, in this video I want to talk about some of the classes that we have right now that are in BFA that don't quite feel that good, at least for me to play. I'm going to explain to you guys why they don't feel that great going from Legion into BFA that are not GCD related. So I'll try to make this video mostly about the specs in particular, and there's only a few specs that really do fall into that clunky department that I end up playing. I think I've been playing just about every single spec besides mostly healers, unless it's a discipline priest, because that's really just a glorified DPS really. But because the game is only so many months away, a lot of people are wondering what specs are going to feel great, what aren't going to feel great. So here I have for you 3 specs in particular that I personally feel just don't feel quite finished or quite developed. I am not convinced. If that's how they release with the game itself, I'm expecting changes within a month. But I feel like there's going to be more to these specs before the release, or at least I'm hoping for. I guess the first one would be Fury Warrior, but we're not really going to touch on Fury Warrior for too long. Blizzard understood that there's going to be a few more things that need to happen to Fury Warrior. They're still going through a lot of changes, and I took a look at their recent changes and I thought it's not worth making a video on. I'll wait until a finalized version. So I guess we could say that Fury is kind of in the background and it is the unsung 4th choice of this video, but we're not really going to put it on the list because Blizzard is already on the way making changes to the spec. The first one I can touch upon is Elemental Shaman, as that is the one that I have probably the freshest in my head right now. Playing Elemental Shaman on BFA is a little weird. It's not quite Legion, it's not quite Pandaria, it's not quite any of the other expansions that I've played. It's almost kind of like a Warlords of Draenor Shaman, but not quite as bad as it was back in WoD. It feels a little bit clunky because it feels that it's just stuck to the ground too much. Kind of like Bastion or what, you plant yourself in your turret of just nature and fire spells, where your lightning bolts don't really feel quite as impactful, your lava bursts do feel at least that's somewhat worth of damage. You have for the most part a very rampy playstyle, so not only do you have to stand in the same place, but you also feel slow as you build up your damage for a while, which doesn't feel all that great to play. Don't get me wrong, you have a decent talent variety, but when I'm going to abilities that we have or have had, depending when you watch this video, in Legion, a lot of these abilities like Stormkeeper and Ice Fury and just how strong they are in Legion, and the fact that you cast ability once, you get a bunch of insta-casts allowing you to move and change up your playstyle and being able to fire like back to back, Nature Frost at the enemy. A lot of those abilities are more standardized and they don't really affect your damage that much. For example, you used to cast Ice Fury and then be able to burst blast through the enemy, so it felt exciting when you're questing, when you're able to nuke down an enemy that usually would take you a while, instead of casting lightning bolts back to back until it dies. Now it feels like a lot of these abilities do affect your damage and playstyle a little bit, but for the most part they don't really speed up or slow down your rotation, so they don't quite feel as impactful of a choice. Also, a lot of them got standardized, where they had their cooldown increased, or the amount of charges decreased, or the damage been adjusted where it's just not quite as explosive. They don't really take away and lower your damage, but they don't really speed it up. So it doesn't feel quite as good to choose into these abilities and then get the cast off and then just feel like you get like a really second-hand result. But what I did find interesting about Elemental Shaman is if you try to replicate Cataclysm Shaman, where you spawn 4 totems at a time, all buffing you with totem mastery, then you go grab the Lava Magma Burst totem, the one that explodes and just AoEs enemy in place of Searing totem, it really does end up doing a decent amount of damage, single target or AoE. So you have all these totems buffing you, you have Earth Shield protecting you, you have this Searing totem, Magma totem, just spraying magma on cooldown, and then on top of your elemental damage is a lot stronger as of now. It feels like a lot of your damage from your Shaman being offset to other elements, like totems being more effective or elementals being a lot stronger, where elementals end up doing in some cases more burst damage than you, which makes you rely onto those things. Instead of having the damage come from the Shaman from the within, it really feels like it comes from other sources. And when that happens, casting Lightning Bolt just feels not as satisfying. And I think that if they were to go and add moving effect while casting a Lightning Bolt so you can move while casting it, I feel like a lot of people would feel like Cataclysm Shaman or Mr. Pandaria Shaman again, where you could move. It would feel complete, and maybe that's what feels really weird. Maybe if they were to take out some of the damage from, let's say, your elementals and maybe have a more utility, but rather give the damage back to the actual spells of the Shaman, then I feel like it might feel a little bit more wholesome. or if they are going to offset it to other elements, which I think is going to be interesting, to kind of just throw a totem out and it does majority of the damage, or drop an elemental and just let him go havoc on everybody while you're kind of just trying to dodge mechanics. It would feel at least complete or familiar. It won't quite, I don't know if it will feel better. I don't know if the playstyle would be better, and maybe they would have to balance more things, but just the way that it feels right now, it feels too immobile and a little sluggish. The next spec that I was really concerned about is Shadow Priest. The first thing I didn't like about it is that dots matter a lot less. When it comes to single target damage on Legion, Shadow Priest really blow everybody out of the water with single target, because their 2 dots, Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch, are such hard hitters. And the whole playstyle ends up being about maintaining those dots and extending them and keeping them running for as long as possible while you are in void form. The change in BFA is the idea that dots are supposed to fall off eventually. They don't really quite refresh as well as they do right now in Legion, but they also deal very, very little damage. It feels like most of your damage really comes from your Mind Blast and Mind Seers, which I guess is understandable because they don't want Shadow Priest to be able to cleave 2, 3, 4 targets and have majority of your damage comes from your dots, because dots are really easy to put up and maintain, which allows you to do insane amounts of damage in the long run. Instead, dots end up being kind of means to an end. Having dots on enemies allows you, when you go into void form, to hit every enemy that has a dot on them with a burst of shadow spell to do a lot of burst AoE damage. But because your dots are not quite as powerful anymore, you have other abilities that will offset. It feels like at one point you just even throw your dots and forget about them. Let's say when you have a bunch of enemies together, there's a talent that allows you to get this kind of void pulse around enemies, and any enemy you hit 10 yards around them, everybody will get a Shadow Word Pain. Now, a lot of you would think, yeah, Shadow Word Pain on a bunch of enemies in a single go is actually exciting, and yes, it's going to deal decent damage, but the reason the Shadow Priest would really want to do that is mostly because they want to go for the Void Eruption just to burst AoE everybody, and then they'll forget about dots, they won't try to maintain them, they'll just go for a Mind Seer, which is cool that Mind Seer is back, but it feels like a lot of the dots are means to an end or start to piggyback at the back of the line when it comes to Shadow Priest damage. It feels a little weird because you have these dots and you spend time casting them and spending globals on them, and when they do such little damage in single target situations, it just feels really, really weird. On top of it, Vampiric Touch ends up feeling very, very useless. It doesn't deal a lot of damage, and it has a very interesting effect. Combined with your Artifact Open in Legion, it actually provides you a heal as well as an absorb if you're already fully healed. So you can put up for you a shield to absorb. So let's say a boss does some kind of AoE damage, at least a portion of the damage will be absorbed with your shield. So you can kind of cover yourself and be a little bit more healy. Because this ability deals such little damage in BFA, the heal is negligent. So it feels just, it's a small heal, but what is the point of that heal? Why is that even an effect? Back in the day, Vampiric Touch used to actually grant you mana because Shadow Priests were very heavy on mana. A lot of your abilities cost a lot of mana, so maintaining Vampiric Touch granted you mana over time. So it was something you just had to maintain because you were mana capped. So this was your only way to recover mana. And in Legion, they made it so that Vampiric Touch was more of a heal, but that heal ended up being actually kind of cool because you could use it in multiple situations. When you're questing and you have a bunch of mobs on you, putting Vampiric Touch on a bunch of them allows you to survive the situation a little bit better. Doing the same thing in BFA doesn't help you a lot, it just makes a lot more enemies hit you, and then you just end up dying a lot quicker. I also kind of don't like the fact that while I'm questing, because of all these healing changes, where a lot of these healing mechanics that used to be part of the spec are kind of gone and just stuck with Vampiric Embrace. Your Disperse used to have a massive heal while you were dispersing, and you could cancel the Disperse but still get the heal thanks to your artifact weapon. It feels that with Vampiric Touch healing you for a lot, you could pull multiple mobs, and even you are a Clothy Shadow Priest, even you could at least, pull a bunch of enemies and feel powerful when you're bursting them down. Right now as a Shadow Priest, it feels like I'm pressing Power Word Barrier every single global that I get, no matter what I'm doing. And it feels a little bit weird just to be pressing Power Word Barrier, Power Word Barrier, Power Word Barrier as I'm just trying to do some quests. It feels a bit obnoxious and annoying because I'm pressing the same button over and over and over. It's not a button that deals damage, it's just something to keep me protected from the damage that I take. I kind of like the ability where you leech the damage or the health from the enemy as you deal damage to them. The whole Vampiric Touch makes you feel like you're a Shadow Priest where you're trying to mess with the enemy's head, but you also have this Vampiric Presence, Vampiric Embrace. You have all these Vampiric abilities, and the last thing you feel like a vampire. You feel kind of like a Disciplined Priest and then mostly Shadow, but you definitely are a Disciplined Priest because you spam and bubble like a Disc Priest. The last spec I could talk about is Windwalker, but first of all, Windwalker is good spec. Right now it deals great damage. A lot of people are playing the different playstyles, people are trying to find different builds, and for the most part people seem okay with how it plays. It still retains that interesting mastery, which I always like the idea of, just the idea of that mastery. When it comes to making sure that you're using abilities that are not a repeat of each other. That means you never want to have the same exact rotation where it's just spamming abilities. Rather, you're trying to construct your rotation where you're trying to make sure you're not capped on energy regeneration, but you're also not capped on chi. You'll always have an ability to use every single global, and you're trying to maximize the effectiveness of it all together. Comes up for a very, very interesting playstyle in terms of your rotation. And I always liked Windwalker for that. I know I said at the beginning of the video I don't want to bring GCD as like a main point of why I don't like a certain spec, but I have a sneaking suspicion that GCD actually might play pretty big in this one, although I don't want to contribute GCD as the thing that has ruined Windwalker monks. Compared to Legion, they definitely feel slower. It feels like their damage, for the most part, is hard-hitting, but instead of having a bunch of fast little hits that you can kind of use and weave back to back to back, having a lot of damage when you have big cooldowns, but even without cooldowns, you have a fairly fast and quick rotation. I'm not sure if it's GCD or if it's just stats and how they're standardized for BFA, but it definitely feels one of the specs that has the slower swing to it, especially after you exhaust a lot of your energy. Even the talents that are used to give yourself back energy or even generate more chi, a lot of those talents feels like just cut back just a little bit more than expected. Instead of feeling like a spec that feels very much has an answer every single global, there's always something to press, rather it starts to feel a lot like Arms Warrior or a heavier strength class. A lot more of that cooldowns that are a little bit longer. You're kind of waiting up for the big haymaker ability. You don't always have just some little jabs and kicks anymore. It feels like you are at one point, after you exhaust your cooldowns, after you exhaust all your energy, it feels like it hits slower, but hits for more. And that playstyle, that sluggishness that I just don't like about Windwalker, something about it I feel like needs to change. If they were to maybe increase the energy regen for Windwalker, but decrease your damage, maybe increase the damage of your auto attacks just a little bit more to offset it, so it can have that faster feeling playstyle to it, kind of like how Demon Hunters have currently, where Demon Hunters, for the most part, a good chunk of their abilities kind of just tickle, but you can do so many of them back to back to back. It feels like there's always something to press, always something to do, always a button to hit in the rotation. Because your abilities tickle, at least you can get a bunch of them back to back to back. Windwalkers are going from Legion feeling like there's always something to press, always something to do, always something to hit, into more of a weightier but a heavier and almost a slower specialization. And I think just about wraps up all the specs that I'm concerned right now. Now, I didn't make this video to say these specs suck, it's just I think they're not finished. So if you are somebody who wants to level an Elemental Shaman or Shadow Priest or a Windwalker Monk and you like them and how they play in Legion, I feel like if you were to take the specs from Legion into BFA, it might feel like a rude wake-up call in a way. And I don't think a lot of people would want to invest that time leveling those specs and then just not enjoying the playstyle in the long run. If anything, I'm not saying you shouldn't level those specs, but I do think you should start paying attention to what they are like once the pre-patch comes out, or once any kind of bloop notes come out from the developers, or on websites like Wowhead, any class changes that have to do with these three specs. I would just start paying attention to them, start monitoring to them, and I think the easiest way, if there are going to be any changes to these three specs, is probably subscribing to this channel. Now, it's probably the best time for me to go plug myself, because chances are, if any of these three classes do get updated, chances are I will go and make a video about them. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope I at least answered some questions for you guys if you were looking at Ellie, Shadow Priest, or Windwalker. These are the three specs that I think will get a few more changes before BFA is released, but if they come out as they are right now, I'd be a little bit concerned. As always, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more when it comes to these three specs or any other videos that I have on the channel, and hit the notification bell, because subscribing is simply not enough on YouTube. Thank you guys so much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in another video.